Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We are in the West Ballroom here at the UMC. Today is Wednesday, April 10th. It's 1:30, and this is panel 17982, titled Leadership in Business: What Separates Great Leaders from the Rest? Introduce myself, I'm Scott Schaefer. I'm a former corporate officer at Bell South and Level 3. Also did a venture-backed startup in the Bay Area, and now I own and operate in a business called Embrazio, which is a leather accessories and jewelry company here in Boulder with my wife. We begin these panels now with a land acknowledgement that I will read to you. Today we would like to acknowledge that Boulder is on the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of indigenous peoples who have traversed, lived in, and stewarded lands in the Boulder Valley since time immemorial. Those indigenous nations include the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and the Ute. For question and answers today, which we hope there are a lot of, that's the main portion of this, we're going to be using the note card system, so just raise your hand, and Chuck or Xander in the back will bring a piece of paper and pencil over to you. Those will come up to me, and then generally I'll just ask the questions. Sometimes I'll combine them if they're two that are very similar. There's one over there as well. Let me give you a little bit about our panelists today. We have a fantastic panel for you. You can read the in-depth bios on your program. But let me begin with Lucy Lawrence. Lucy, raise your hand there if they can't see the card. She's an entrepreneur, an investor, an advisor, and in that capacity, of course, she sees many business leaders from many different angles. Charles, and I say your last name for us, Charles.
Nsilanga.
Nsilanga. I should have asked you that beforehand. Charles is a social entrepreneur, and he works a lot with our future leaders, mentoring youth, trying to help youth understand how to start and grow businesses in a way that continue to operate. Carl Cantonina next to me is a journalist, a news personality, moderator of him in his own right. I saw Carl when he moderated the GOP debate here.
No, brother.
A few years ago, which is a bit of a raucous, but you handled it well. Very much awarded in journalistic circles. You might see him every morning, as I do, on Squawk on the Street on CNBC. So he, in his capacity, sees business leaders by the hundreds during the year. I can't wait to hear what Carl has to say. Nancy Wang at the end. I didn't get a chance to talk to you, Nancy, a lot before the panel, but she's a tech investor. She led a big business of her own while at Amazon, and now she advises business leaders and boards from companies large and small. So her perspective is going to be interesting from what does it take to be a successful leader in a small business environment versus a large business environment. And I can tell you they're quite different, having lived that myself. So I want to start off with, I'm going to give them my question, but not expect them to answer it till after they do their initial 2 to 3 minutes, so they can think about it a little bit, especially you, Nancy, since I didn't clue you in yet. But I thought about this panel, and as I think about big business leaders, what makes great leaders in business, it struck me that there are often leaders in business that we think are great, only to see them flame out. And I think of Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos, Bernie Ebbers in my industry in telecom with WorldCom, Joe Naccio here in Denver, Ken Lay, Jeff Skilling at Enron. And all of those people were regarded as industry visionaries or leaders at one point in time, but they turned out not to be sustainable anyway. So the question for the panel is, what are the tells that you use when you are with a supposedly great business leader that tells you this is somebody that really is a great business leader and will leave a legacy as such, versus somebody that maybe bears watching a little bit longer? That's the question. And so we'll start now with their opening comments, somewhere around 3 minutes or so. And Carl, we'll start with you and just work our way down the line, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure. Thanks for coming. It's a joy to be back at the conference. I always like to introduce myself by saying I went to Colorado, class of '93. I came to this conference when I was 14, and I'm a lot older than 14 today. So I remember seeing Roger Ebert screen his films, and the conference just does such amazing work, and just not just for Boulder and the university, but just bringing people together to talk about ideas which I had no idea how much that would be needed when I was younger, but the age we're in, moments like this, rooms like this, you can't have enough of those moments. So it's a great opportunity. Scott's right. I graduated from here. I worked for the Wall Street Journal for 6 years in the Chicago bureau, where I covered airlines and capital equipment, and got to hang out with CEOs at a relatively young age, in my early 20s. And then in television, of course, you're exposed to them on a rotating basis when they come on the air. You learn how to ferret out what's a talking point, what's an original thought, why are they choosing to answer one question, not the other. And then off the record, you do get a better sense about their corporate strategy, their human resource strategy, their leadership blueprint. And over time, it's not that I'm some expert in any one of them, but you learn to recognize some patterns. I would say that I think at the moment we're living in an era in which the quality of American corporate leadership is really good. That is in large part because the current generation of CEOs and C-suite executives have just been through the ringer over and over again over the last 20, 30 years, whether that was the dot-com boom, the harsh lessons from that, which Scott alluded to some of that, especially in areas like telecom, but then the financial crisis, the housing crisis, COVID, this post-COVID period of inflation and money supply growth, and what that's done to growth and pricing over time. They've just seen a lot. And a lot of those lessons are getting absorbed really quickly. Part of it through the advent of new technology helps them learn better, learn faster. And so I think it's reflected in the state of the economy right now, at least in the corporate world. The United States has the best performing economy in the developed world, lowest rates of inflation. Our companies are so quick to adjust to changing conditions, and it sounds painful at the time when Facebook or Meta is laying off thousands or Google's laying off thousands, but then you wait 6 or 7 months and their earnings and their margins are reflecting this discipline, and you're like, how did they know to do that? So I think I have a net optimistic message about the quality of leadership. It's not to say there aren't going to be tape bombs down the road, but I got some ideas on what those qualities are in general and how they get applied.
Hi, Lucy Lawrence. It's my first time as a speaker. Sorry, there. Is that better? It's my first time as a speaker, so glad to be here and to have the opportunity to share with you from the aspect of I look at leaders from environments of growth, because I worked in mass retail and e-commerce back in '98, and was able to take a company IPO before the bubble burst, and then sold on to a group that today is Fanatics. And in that period, and in the period soon after, which was we sold the company to eBay, I have had the opportunity to work with leaders and be a manager, then leader of organizations where the pace was much faster than you would have in traditional industries. So from that perspective, the one piece that today, as an investor, I look at in companies that are starting a small to medium business or a startup, I look at the way they treat their immediate staff, and when they're coming in to make the pitches, when they are inviting you to come into some of their events. And I also look at the way they speak of their staff today. I had a recent situation where a project was brought forward, and it's a project going into Mexico. And the leader, speaking of the project, kept saying, but I'm going to help the poor in Mexico, and I'm going to do this for the poor, and they're at the base of the pyramid, and I'm going to pull them out of the base of the pyramid. And then I realized he was talking about the agriculture industry. And I said, well, tell me something, you and the other people around this table. How many of you own land? How many of you own your home? One person did. I said, please don't call them poor. And it's just a choice of words. Obviously, my investment didn't go into it, but it's the way we treat our fellow persons. I think that is a trait that I definitely look for. There are many others, but I would call that as a unique one in the environment that I'm in.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Msilanga. I am originally from Kenya, East Africa, and I want to share my gratitude for being in this platform. And I'm going to share my perspective based on young people, because I come from a space and a place where my work has been empowering and elevating the lives of young people. And my organization is focusing on educating young people, and of course the traditional education, but as well as the non-traditional education, where we help young people elevate their lives through providing them with entrepreneurship skills so that they can be able to run sustainable businesses. And the three things that we are focusing on eradicating is poverty, unemployment, and violence extremism. Now, when we talk to leadership, and my experience on corporate leadership, on the perspective of young people both from Africa and the United States of America, and as well, I am also an alumni of the University of Colorado. I graduated last year with an MBA at the Leeds School of Business. My perspective will be looking for a leader who prioritizes three things, and I will mention them in this order: people, planet, profits. And in the traditional corporate setup, most leaders focus on profit. Now, they will come up and say, you know, we focus on people, we focus on planet, but in real sense, if you look at the words and what they're actually doing in terms of their action, the reality is they are focusing on profits. I understand every business is there to make money. Every business is there to create profits and bring returns to their investors and shareholders. But at the end of the day, based on my perspective, I think a good leader is a leader who genuinely cares about the rising and the development of their people first, because that will automatically make those people buy into the vision of that business. And the reality is, I think if you want to look for a good leader, look at the lowest level staff member and ask them how are they talking about that organization. That will give you a big indication about who a good leader is and who a good leader is not. Because that staff will say, or that staff will give credits based on how they see the organization, because those are the people who go through that organization. And I always like the words of John Maxwell, who says, everything rises and falls on leadership. And if you want to change leadership from any level, I believe it starts from the top. So in my view, I think it starts from people, planet, and profit. Thank you.
It's very well said. I certainly agree with that. I think especially if you go down the organization, the very, I would say, leaf node or the IC level, right? They have no reason to not be transparent with that feedback. So, hello everybody, Nancy Wang. I've had the pleasure that this is my second year as a speaker. Aaron in the conference kindly nominated me the first year. Had so much fun, so here I am again. As was said in my bio, I've led big businesses, billion-dollar-plus businesses for Amazon Web Services in Seattle, Washington. Currently, as a venture capitalist, I also work with some of the smallest startups. So startups that are looking to make their first million in revenue to their first 10, 50, 100, and plus in revenue. So kind of have upshifted, downshifted. A great book, actually, a good framework that I often think about, how do I come off as a leader, for example, is how many of us have read the book From Good to Great, right? Okay, awesome. So I'm glad to speak to fellow minds here. Right, so when the book talks about level 5 leader, and I feel like a lot of themes from the book still carry, even though obviously some of the examples might be dated, like Circuit City, for example. But just how it talks about, good leaders, and I've had the pleasure of both working for and being mentored by some of the amazing leaders right now in Silicon Valley, leading public companies that are about to go IPO, right, they are mission driven, right? So they rarely talk about, oh, this job is great for me because I get to. No, it's more of, hey, I'm really into the mission of the company, or I really see sort of my role taking the company from X to Y, right? Where it is today to IPO, to a very strategic outcome. And really that's, I think, the common theme that I've seen across many successful leaders. I would say one thing, I'm curious actually to hear from the panel in our discussions today is, as we think about, for example, the Gen Z population or the millennials, right? A lot of folks, you can just read New York Times to see that the public opinion is that millennials and Gen Z have not gone through a lot of the cycles that perhaps older generations have gone through. And so first, seeing this firsthand with some of the layoffs that the panelists mentioned have occurred in the tech industry in the last 2 years, right? That's sometimes the first maybe setback that the Gen Z population or generation has seen on whole, right? Because just not that long ago, you could graduate with a CS degree and choose and pick your litter among 6-figure jobs, right? That's no longer the case. And so I'm actually very curious how leaders of major corporations will essentially guide their organization as well as the community through this transition where the tech industry is downsizing a bit, right? And where some of the millennials and Gen Zs are going through this cycle for the first time.
Wow. A lot to chew on there, I think. I'm going to change my question since you guys already kind of answered it as we went through. So this age of technology, you kind of touched on it, Carl did as well. How has the acceleration of change in technology, not any particular one, but even when I started out as a business leader, it's 10x the change now than when I started. How does that affect your basic skills that you need to build as a leader? Maybe, and I'll throw that open to the panel just to get things going.
Yeah, so I thought about this, like last year, actually, when I was giving the commencement speech at UPenn. So that's my alma mater. And technically, I was called a young graduate because I graduated the class of 2013. But however, actually, if you rewind back to when I was going through our engineering curriculum, the focus was very different, right? Some of the principles still carry to how I think about tech today, like algorithms, data structures, distributed systems, but it just in terms of the languages, right? Or even if you get some more tactical to the databases that we actually use, right? We use MySQL. Now today you have, edge databases, right? CockroachDB, right? Like the whole curriculum has just completely shifted. And actually very recently, we announced our first ever degree of degree of engineering in artificial intelligence, not even computer science, right? And so that just represents the shifts of academia with what industry is looking for and the skill sets. So I think maybe just rewind and looking back at the 10 years, right, there's always going to be new advances, incremental advances in technology. But actually what is really exciting with obviously what OpenAI has done in the last 18 months with this whole notion of generative AI is that coding or being able to write code is no longer that far off for a lot of people, right? You can use now text prompts to generate code. You can use prompt engineering. I've seen people do it, create entire full stack apps with one sentence, right? So the access to technology is just so much more pervasive today. And so from an academic perspective, I'll be chatting about this with fellow board members in a month, right, is how does that actually change how students today consume information, right? Because it's just that much easier to go onto ChatGPT or Perplexity AI, right, and ask a question and have that system or platform automatically do, kind of index, right, all of the websites or all of the documents out there that are relevant to your search. Does that mean that the bar for research papers or assignments even have just gone through the sky?
That's very genuine, and I'd like to add what Nancy is saying in terms of right now, Gen Z, millennials, when it comes to skill, I think they're a generation that is open to as much information as possible. They can get it. But all this generative AI, this the change that is happening really fast, comes with it other aspects that I think needs to be integrated when we're talking about leadership. And that is the aspect when it comes to mental health. As much as we see some significant transition in terms of AI and all this good stuff, it comes with it a lot with young people, let's say, for example, not being able to stay in a job for 5 years. Why is that? It comes with young people not being able to maintain their mental health, and it comes with a lot of things that are a lot, and I think there needs to have leaders who will mentor these young people with the capacity to handle everything that comes with that. And I read an article the other day that says that these two generations are not able to handle pressure and stress in a way that the previous generations can. And so these are things I think that leaders need to be able to teach, because when it comes to technology, they have access, they can teach themselves. Probably they know more than their leaders themselves. But you see, when it comes to these soft skills in real life situation, relating with people, handling pressures that come with life, these, I think, are the things that contribute to lack of job retention for these young people in the current workforce and workspace that we currently have. So I think that's where young people can learn from leaders in business, whereby it's not only about the skill, it's about how do we develop you to be able to handle the pressure that will come. Because these are the people who will be the CEOs tomorrow. These are the people who will be the VCs tomorrow, and these are the people who will be able to handle the big responsibilities in the days to come. And if they don't have the capacity to handle that, they will crack. So I think that's my perspective based on that subject.
I think it's going to be interesting how technology changes so many different things, but especially how it changes leaders' strategy when it comes to their teams. For example, there's a great, Steve Jobs of Apple has a great line talking about the time between the idea and the product. And in that time, he argued, the idea will change several times as you figure out new challenges come up, new opportunities come up. So by the time it comes to product, comes to market, it's much different than the original idea was. But part of that process in Steve Jobs' mind was letting your people fight. And he has this great analogy of when he was a kid, he had a neighbor who showed him this, it was like a tin can, and this old neighbor of his said, "Come over here." And they put all these rocks in the tin drum along with some grit powder. And then it was on an automatic rotating thing. And the neighbor was like, "Come back tomorrow." So the little Steve Jobs comes over to his neighbor's house the next day, and they open the can, and it's full of these polished rocks. Because overnight, they'd just banging into each other, they got refined. And this was Jobs' metaphor. We're letting your people fight it out. In the end, the product gets better. But once machines get good enough to bypass that process, you have to wonder how that's going to change your culture, really is what it is. The only caveat I would add is that ChatGPT, I saw there's a great piece on Axios this week. They had ChatGPT try to do a March Madness bracket, and it came in 13 millionth on ESPN. So
I was 13 million and
yeah,
one.
exactly. So this stuff is not infallible. Obviously, it's learning every day. But that's the kind of thing that leaders are having to think about, not just what the process is today, but what it'll be in a year or 5 years.
And to complement your points, companies today are building to adapt. I do not believe they're no longer building to last. And with that said, as you were saying, the younger generations as well as the seasoned ones who are trying to stay one step ahead, companies were being built as tech companies. Today, they're being built as software companies. And you had founders that had business backgrounds. MBAs were very important. And today, we have a lot of the founders being tech teams who are figuring out, hey, in that process, a lot of those rocks that got tumbled and refined have figured out, you know what, I can understand, I can talk to the audience, and I can build as a tech person into a business solution. So there's that, I would say specifically in the business world, I think there's that evolution. The pandemic has made us global in oh so many ways. So where you were trying to, you had, and coming, working in developing markets, we had a lot of copycat solutions. Today, you have products or companies that are giving you a local innovation and can go globally soon after. And that we didn't see back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I mean 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We had teams, oh, we need to go and have a team go into this market and understand the market, or let's take our leadership and go into this market. Today, you can stay in whatever market you are and still talk to those audiences. And technology has allowed us to have a farther reach as far as leadership and the teams that you build, to Nancy's initial point about getting students how they consume. It's also how we think. And I think that's going to be, or that is one of the biggest fears I sense out of artificial intelligence, is that, oh, it's going to think faster than me. No, it's probably going to figure out the answer. Doesn't mean it's going to think or it's going to create faster than you. So that I challenge or I invite, especially in academia, challenge us on our thinking, on our patterns. You know, I wish Professor Daniel Kahneman was still around in Thinking Fast and Slow. It's how we think. Right now, we're consuming so much. Take that breather to think. And as a leader, take that time to provoke, as you were saying, provoke the teams to think through a problem, not just give them the answer.
Lucy, you said a comment there, a concept that I had never considered, which was businesses are not built today to last, pardon the pun or the title, but they're built kind of to solve an opportunity in the moment for a while. That's interesting, and it helped me choose the first question from the student, and you get to be the first to answer it. In a fast-paced startup culture, how do new budding startups stay mission-driven long-term? And I'll add, or is that something they shouldn't be as concerned about as we were?
No, you should absolutely. Mission-driven is very different than your strategy and how you're going to get to that and your objectives. In startups or in fast-paced, fast growth, you do need to have that North Star, because you're going to be evolving in this environment of growth, in this fast pace, and you have to act small in many cases, or fail, you know what they say, fail fast. I'm thinking in Spanish instead of English, so I'm trying to translate fast enough. The mission, be driven by it, but understand that your leadership And your team is going to evolve, because right now it's approximately 12 to 18 months when companies are seeing changes. You're gonna have to see changes. So you may bring in today a CFO that's gonna help you get the funding, but in 18 months, you're gonna need a CFO that's gonna help you get profitable and get a positive, if that's what you need. Or you may need a CFO who's going to help you reinvest the money so that you have that continued growth. And in 8 years, which would be, that's long-term in the startup world, if you're not acquired and if you're still freestanding, that CFO is helping you go public, or that CFO is coming in here with skills of, let's take this into international markets, or do we need to reframe the company if we're not growing, and you bring a different skill set. So as a founder of a startup, you need to be, I invite them to be very self-aware of where they are in that process. And to your initial point, to your initial question, there was something I completely missed. Who's on your board? Mm-hmm. And that your boards really should cycle members every 2.5 to 3 years in spatials. Because where you are trying to go today with your mission is not where you're gonna try to be there in 5 years. So, and board members should not be offended when they're asked to exit the board, or when you say, now we need this different skill set. Because your board is the mentor, it's the coach, and it's usually who sits down with you to look at your strategy as a company, so.
Okay, Nancy, any thoughts on that question?
No, I think Lucy framed it really nicely. Look, I would just say it even, I think, boils down to how you think about investing in startups. So, for example, I cover deep tech typically, so given my background in cloud computing, and before that I worked in storage and networking as well. So it usually lends itself to infrastructure companies or security companies. And it's well known among investors that security companies often get acquired or bought, right? Because if you think about the big players in security, there's only a few of them, being CrowdStrike, right, Palo Alto Networks, Wiz, so on and so forth. And so it also translates the mindset of the founder when they initially pitch to a VC, right? They need to have that exit potential in mind of who could potentially buy me, what does that end exit valuation look like, and at the post money that I'm seeking, what does that translate to a multiple for the investor? Right? It's very, very different from, let's say, maybe an AI infra company right now, where the sky's really the limit, right? And even if they're very, very early, saying 3 PhDs, right, and 1 business person, they're already thinking about, well, this could be an IPO company because it's such a green space, right? And so that translates to your mindset as a founder is based on your sector, based on your own, profile and the experiences that you have. What is a realistic outcome? And I think, especially as we have gone through this, I would say, tightening cycle in the economy, VCs or investors will be looking for more realistic answers as to what you think the end outcome could be.
Any other comments on that question? All right, we'll go on to the next one. In some organizations, there are many tenured mid-level managers who seem negative, maybe burned out. Obviously, there are performance reviews, and those people can get weeded out. But how, on the other hand, how would you, as a business leader, re-engage, re-energize, spark those folks who may have just become stale and need a new boost?
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with someone who used to, or is still on my former team at AWS, and it's something that, frankly, if you ask me what keeps you up at night, I thought a lot about, is maintaining a positive and healthy culture. Because, especially as my business grew, and it grew from nothing, because we launched it all the way to over $1 billion in run rate, and so that through that time, the team also grew tremendously, from a team of 18 engineers that I launched the business with to over an org of 200. And at some point, between myself and, Charles mentioned sort of the junior IC on the team, there were about 6 layers, right? And so at that point, you can't have one-on-ones with everyone on your org, right? You can't even meet with every manager in your team regularly because you still need to do your job, right? And so that behooves then, how do you build a culture of accountability, ownership, and also transparency. So I'm happy to chat about this at length. I don't want to take up the time of this panel, but we implemented sort of frameworks and mechanisms that worked really well for us, such as anonymous surveys, such as, for example, we would do a tech survey every year where people could rate me, for example, on satisfaction, how they see their own manager, so on and so forth. And all of that was transparent. You could simply look by, general manager and then see and scroll down to every layer within the organization to see how your own manager scored. Right, and so that then became a pride of the organization that we were able to keep high, essentially CSAT scores among our employees or the team members that we had, and also became a powerful recruiting tool. But it certainly was, not organic. You do have to think about that and meet as a staff, as a leadership team regularly to talk about how do you keep the culture vibrant.
I love that. That would have scared the hell out of me when I got started, but I love that. I can see how that'd be real positive. Any other comments on that question? Go ahead, Charles.
To add on what Nancy has said, I think when you see you're leading a team, or let's say a leader in any business, I look at it as sharing the vision of that business to a point where every person in that business doesn't look at this business just as a place to work, but looks at this business as I am part of the owner of this thing. Because the moment you look at a business as I am part of the owner of this business, you automatically transform yourself from an employee to a steward of this business. And that automatically brings inspiration, motivation, and development to the business from the staff. So when we're looking at burnout, to me, I think number one is the culture. Number two is, are the staff or the team member of that business bought into the vision of that business? Are they looking at this business as something bigger than me, as I'm part of something that is bigger and greater, and I'm excited to see this? Or am I here just to get a paycheck and go away? If the answer is the latter, then automatically there will be no inspiration. But if the employee look at this particular business as something that I am part of this, I am owning this business, then the burnout will be there, but the adaptation of it will always be maintained. So I think that's something that I wanted to contribute on that.
I mean, the trends that we're talking about really are about transparency within the organization. So I think it's harder for Deadwood to survive in an environment where everything is instantly available for all to see. I know when I covered Twitter prior to their IPO, they had a policy where every meeting had minutes taken, and the moment the meeting was over, the minutes were available to anyone in the company. And that's easy to do now with AI. I mean, AI will write the minutes of your meeting for you, and it takes less than a second for it to get published, and it goes to everybody in the building. I've never worked at Amazon, but Amazon is famous for having Jeff speak last in a meeting, because no one, if Bezos were to speak first, everyone who was going to say something might adjust their commentary. Oh, well, Jeff's not into that. Right. I'll change my tune. When he's the last to speak, you're forced to give your unfiltered opinion.
Right.
Little tricks like that, I think, just make corporate life more competitive. And if you're here to draw on that paycheck in a lazy fashion, it's just not going to last as long as it would have, say, 20, 30 years ago.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Also on that meeting note, we would never have a meeting unless you wrote a doc, which meant that if you're not willing to put in the time to put your ideas on paper, at the minimum was a one-pager narrative, then it's not worth other people spending time out of their precious days, busy schedules to attend your meeting. So I think that kept the bar high as well on the accountability of what are you coming to discuss, who are you going to have at that meeting, why should they take time out, and what do you want from them, right? Is it approval, is it action from their part? So all of that was directly on paper. And I think to the culture of making sure that folks who may not be the loudest voice in the room, and this goes into a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is having more women and underrepresented leaders in the room, right? If you don't have the loudest voice, but you're able to, if everyone has to put their thoughts on a document, like a narrative, before they come to the room, even if you are maybe more introverted, right, your ideas still get out there and they still get reviewed.
Is it a 6-page doc? What's the famous Amazon doc length?
Press release.
It's, I quote unquote, 6 pages. And I say that actually jokingly because, so our most famous 6-pager is our annual OP1, which is the annual planning. And that's basically like pitching your business to now, Adam and Peter for additional funding for the next year, because the growth of your team, even keeping your team the same size, is not guaranteed. It is not a right, it is a privilege, right? Because there's so many things that the company on whole could be investing in. So you really need to justify where your headcount is going and what ROI it's going to generate for the company. So in that vein, 6 pages was the main narrative, but oftentimes it would be 50 pages because you would need appendices A, B, C, D, all the way, I've seen like M and N on like financial P&Ls, customer testimonials. Sometimes there'd be like, especially for the deep tech products we worked on, system architecture diagrams, source code. So yeah, all of that would be part of the 6-pager.
But to that point and to Charles's earlier point, the accountability and the running your business unit as a business within the organization and assigning the entire team responsibility changed the KPIs, the key performance indicators, but it also, there's a side effect there, which is costs. When your entire company feels as part of the mission or feels that they own their business unit or their team, they start looking at cost and the cost savings. And we saw it in 2 different groups where we evolved and made ownership across the company. And it was very interesting. We had individuals who would have been that quiet middle manager come forward and say, we could be more effective here if we had this cost savings here, and we could be doing this if we had it here. And I thought that was a fantastic side effect, or after.
In businesses I've been associated with, the CFO was often instrumental in driving change just that way. They would say, we're cutting 20% of your budget. Well, I can't, all these things. Oh, well, it must be 25 then. And you would go do that, and the thing would run better. And you go, how did I miss that? You just can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. We have a question here about the changing nature of business, and there's kind of an assumption in here. But let's deal with this question for just a second. We look at the majority of businesses as designed to create wealth, grow profit and loss, but we also see trends toward consciousness of humanity. What do you see as the path for moving from conventional profit and loss businesses to integrate more social consciousness as part of the goal and objective of a business?
I mean, there's a lot of really relevant stories on that front in large cap corporate America right now. Disney is probably the prime example of a company that got attacked, you could argue, because of a, quote, woke culture, and politicians tried to leverage that to boost notoriety for their presidential runs or whatever. It resulted in legal disputes in Florida regarding Disney's ability to control its own infrastructure, which just got settled. But Disney kind of went through this curve where, were they going to fight, right? Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, has a lot of employees for whom certain values are important, and it's a big reason why they even work at Disney in the first place. Or are they an entertainment company that needs to maximize their TAM and their audience and just entertain? The way it looks like it settled out is, and we had, because of this recent proxy fight at Disney, we had some board members on our show the last couple of weeks, and their attitude was mostly where it makes sense for us to promote our vision of equality, inclusion, what have you, through our entertainment, that's fine, but we would, quote, like to turn the noise down. Mm-hmm. So that's just a very tough, it's a very tough calculus. And Target could tell you that, Bud Light could tell you that, because...
So does it proactively mean all CEOs ought to be really dialing that into their thoughts and their plans?
I don't know. I mean, for every Target, for example, there's I'm trying to think of like a Ben & Jerry's or it's not North Face, it's a Patagonia, some other company for whom those values are just laddered higher. right? And they'll supplant other worries about lost profit even, maybe. But the polarization of the electorate has to have an impact on really board strategy is what it comes down to. It's hard.
And be careful with greenwashing, because I see that
Define that for us.
you have SDG, sustainable development, sorry, not SDG, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And there is this framework where companies are measuring themselves as accountability back into their communities, into the planet, and such. There is some noise, I will say, around greenwashing, which is we're going to talk about it and we're going to say we're doing this. Keyword, say. And I think we hear it quite a bit, not necessarily see it in the actions of the companies. So when you were saying, elevating and that all leaders should be doing it, I don't know that they should be doing, that they should be acting on it, yes, but maybe not. They're trying to talk about it before they're acting on it.
Maybe that's one of the tells of great leaders that we talked about early on. Do they talk the talk in a sincere way, and then do they walk that talk? If you're not going to walk it, don't talk it, right? Charles, what's your thought coming from maybe a different environment?
I think we are. These are my thoughts. I think we're getting into an era where a business has a merger when it comes to social change and the environment as well. I think most businesses, something like ESG, carbon accounting is a term that was not there, but today is there. And how if you look at the trend, things to do with equality, it was not there in business, but today you see it being there. And I think these are factors that will define the success of any business, regardless of what they bring into the market. And if a business is seen not to be a business that cares about the representation or the positive impact they bring to its population, to its customer, you will find automatically they will be attacked politically, socially, and in the long run, economically. So I think businesses right now are getting into a trend where they have to listen to the people. They have to listen. They have to see not what the people need in terms of products, but what people need in terms of lifestyle. So I think we're getting into that shift, and of course, I might be wrong, but that's what I've seen. Yeah.
Nancy, any thoughts?
Sure. I guess something that I'm very attuned to. So I started a nonprofit back in 2016 when I was at Google called Advancing Women in Tech. And it's been a passion I've carried throughout my career, even after Google, moved to startups, AWS, now in venture. And it's, I would say, very shocking to now discover that we are in the age of DEI backlash. So if you Google that term online, it is a thing, right? So if you look at how many donations have been made to nonprofits that are focused on gender issues, gender leadership equity, it's been the lowest in a decade plus, right? And so what that translates into is, all of the years, I think, when things were good, right? Companies were booming during the COVID era, companies were sponsoring a lot of, I would say, DEI talks or workshops or trainings. I've always been of the mindset that DEI has to be actionable, right? Which is, how do we put truly qualified people who are diverse, who are underrepresented into key leadership roles? So I think I would say, while it is unfortunate, it's also placed a spotlight into how do you actually make diversity and equity actionable in the workforce, and how does that tie closer to business objectives? And so I'm optimistic that we will find our way out of this sort of, fog and, really make strides in I think focusing again on the equity and representation in our workforce.
Excellent. All right, this is time now for the impromptu audience interaction component that I just made up. If I said to you, I want you to shout out the name of a company, This company is currently in the news, and they're receiving punch after punch after punch. The hits just keep on coming. You would shout out.
Boeing.
Boeing. Boeing. Boeing is the one I was looking for, because now we can put our panel on the spot and say, you are knighted, or whatever, anointed, tomorrow CEO of Boeing. You have to answer this at a macro level. We're not talking about, technical product issues or anything like that. But as a leader, you come in on that first day, how do you set the tone? What do you say that is going to right the cultural ship of Boeing and get us all rowing in the right direction? Nancy, why don't you start us off? We'll work this way.
Yeah, the first priority I'd have is trust, right? Sure, you can bring in an AI gimmick or introduce new products, sure, right? And this is being said from a technologist, right? But I think ultimately from a business perspective, just all of the security or the safety issues, all of the maintenance issues that have happened with those aircrafts, right? Ultimately, people are trusting you with their lives to sit in your airplanes, right? So that's what I would focus on first. And of course, that sort of principle, driving principle, then guiding all of the other actions that are needed from both a business, a stakeholder, and a technology perspective.
Accountability. There have been mistakes. I'll come out as a leader and say, yes, there have been mistakes, and we take accountability as a company, and whatever it is that we need to take as responsibility, we will take it. But this is a sign that we are responsible, we are accountable, and this will never happen again, and I'll make sure that it will never happen again.
Lucy, you're now CEO of Boeing. Day one.
Congratulations, Boeing.
It pays good, but it may not last.
No hablo inglés. Accountability, owning up to it in my language to my audience, but at the exact same time, understanding why this happened internally. Is it because of the equipment? Is it because of the maintenance? Mm-hmm. Is it because of how we are training? And I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Is it how we're training the airline engineers that maintain them? Is it that they're cutting costs on that? Get the trail of why it happened. Because it wasn't happening. And it started happening. Mm-hmm. And these are engines and equipment that have been in the market for a long time.
Okay.
No, I think it would involve some degree of admission. And there's what we call a duopoly defense in the aerospace industry, meaning there's really only two makers of large commercial aircraft. There's Boeing and Airbus. And the backlog is so long, the line is so long to get a fresh plane that no one's going to leave Boeing to get at the back of the line of Airbus and delay those deliveries even further, especially since traffic demand is post-COVID highs and is only going higher. So there would be some admission that, you know what, we know that we're in the catbird seat. We know everybody wants our planes. We know there are only two major plane makers, and we probably let the balance between profit and safety get out of alignment. I think that's a horrible thing to admit, but it probably is at play, this duopoly defense. The other thing I would do is try to educate, and I don't know whether this would involve, I mean, so much of it is optics and politics with families of victims or what have you, but some education of just how hard it is to build a commercial airliner. The number of suppliers, and they're not all American, and you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of contracts, and you've got subcontractors and the assembly, and it sounds easy because these planes just show up. And we get on. Oh, the Dreamliner. Oh, it looks fancy. Wow, I love it. Are we on a Dreamliner today, Scott? But the process of putting it together and making it the safest form of transportation in history is really hard. So maybe some element of pleading for a little mercy, like over time, our record is better than any other way of getting around, and it's just to do this day in, day out takes work.
You know, your comments remind me of a real excellent short essay called I Pencil. If you've never heard of it, look it up on the internet, I Pencil. It's about 3 or 4 pages, and it talks about how you manufacture a number 2 pencil. And it's incredible. You'll have fun. Now, I'm surprised none of you directly answered with the word empowerment on Boeing. This question comes in and says, how do you view the role of empowerment throughout the team, throughout the organization? How do you foster the right level of empowerment? Back to maybe Charles, your comments about viewing yourself as an owner, but obviously everyone's not an owner, but that you want that sense of ownership, you want the sense of empowerment, but you want the appropriate level of empowerment. Any thoughts on how great leaders address that issue? Lucy, any thoughts on that one?
The pairing up, cross-pollinating, I think is a great way to empower. And it goes back to that other question you had when you had the middle manager that's getting stuck, or that may feel they're getting stuck. We will give you a challenge, but we will partner you up with someone who can help you or steer you to solve that challenge. Again, going back to the thinking and not just telling you what to do. I tend to, in the companies that I collaborate in, I tend to bring out external people or people within the other divisions to come in and pull this person forward. And maybe not pull this person forward, but help them pull their idea forward. And I think that's very specifically my way of empowering and helping them lead forward and listening to them. That if they're telling me I can work with this, or I can't work with this, or this may not work, this may not be the way I want to get to that solution, I can help steer them. But I listen to them, and I do try to pair them up with somebody else who's not me.
How about at Amazon? What kind of thoughts did you guys have around empowering the organization inside of Amazon?
Yeah, so since you framed it towards Amazon, I'm sure you all know the famous leadership principles that Jeff came up with. And so empowerment is not one of them, but if we were to describe them as a leadership principle, it'd probably be a crossbreed between ownership and also bias for action. Right? And so if we index on the bias for action, which is you see a problem, you don't just go, oh, that's someone else's problem, or someone will come along and handle it, right? You see a problem, you dive into solving that problem, and you don't stop until you either solve that problem or you decided that that problem is not solvable, and you have a why, right? And it's usually also captured in a document somewhere. So, just going back to thinking about the great bosses that I've had in my career, and places where I've grown the most and also places where folks on my team have grown the most is having managers who have your back, right? So because part of that bias for action is inherently risk-taking, right? You're going to do something that is unknown that may or may not have a positive outcome. Most likely you will fail, right? And it may have downstream ramifications, but do you have a leadership chain that supports you, who has your back, who understands your true intentions about diving into that problem? And so I think, but circling back to empowerment, that's truly what is needed from an organizational level and leadership level to enable people in an organization to feel like, you know what, I do have this agency to dive in and solve this problem.
Bezos just gave a really cool interview to Lex Friedman. Was it a few weeks ago? I can't really, but
Matt Friedman, right.
he talks about when you're debating a problem, not sort of splitting the baby and just collaborating on a solution. There should be one solution, and oftentimes that'll involve one person saying, we're going to try it your way. And the key then is to, if it doesn't work out and we did it your way, not to hold a grudge that Scott messed it up and that it's your fault, because it was a team decision to go one direction.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, what you're referring to is disagree and commit, and also strong opinions but held loosely, right? Because in the debate, sometimes you do end up committing to the other side's or other person's proposal, and that means you commit wholeheartedly.
I think empowerment to me will come back to what I said about ownership. And the question will be like, how do we make people, or how do we make the staff in our team on the company? There have been a lot of ways on how you can do that, but to me, I think some of these ways you don't want staff to feel or to think that we are being corrupted to buy into this organization through initiatives that have no impact whatsoever in my life. So I think looking at staff and how best can we change their lives is a question that every company should look to answer. And I think the answer is different to every organization, because I see organizations being like, hey, we'll give you like 0.005% stake of this company. And if you amount to that, if you look at the true value, it's basically nothing. So you feel like that just because this company says it's employee owned, but in reality, it's not. And it's more than monetary value. It comes to how is the culture as far as that organization? How is the flexibility of work? What are the benefits that this organization gives to its employees? Am I feeling like I'm going to build something really, or am I feeling like I'm being used? So those are the questions that every organization needs to ask and get solutions in terms of how am I making the life of these people who work for this organization better, and be genuinely concerned with that. I think if you have an answer for that, you will basically have the answer on how to empower the people, because basically these people are working so that they can make the organization better, but at the same time, how can you in return make their lives better? So I think that's a question that every organization needs to ask, and if they have the answer to that, then that's the journey to empowerment.
You know, I was given a formula early in my career by one of my mentors, and he said it's RAA. And I found that to be true, that where I felt most empowered, there was a clear alignment of responsibility. Here's your responsibility. Here's the authority you have to execute on that. And here's how I'm going to hold you accountable. And that kind of frees you up to operate. You know where your playing field is, and you can operate within that. Here's a different question. Is there anyone over 60 in these cutting edge organizations and innovative companies that you've been talking about?
Yes, they are.
Great question. Tell us about it.
Over 50, over 60. People who are coming out of retirement, or think they had to go into retirement because they worked at the larger companies and they were into forced retirements. And I have the pleasure of working with several of them. And I will tell you, the experience and the no BS that they bring to the table is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And they are very aware of how to maintain a P&L on a business. They are building, for the most part, I'm counting right now in my head, I have 7 that I work with. 5 of them have businesses that are serving the communities and serving their generation. 2 of them are saying, you know what, I've had this idea, I never got a chance to play with it, and now I want to go out and do it. Age is not an issue, or at least not to me. And by the way, you see it and if you want to try something, go be an intern. I'm actually right now working on a project in the horse racing world, and 5 of our interns are all people over 65.
Mm. Wasn't that a Robert De Niro?
It was a De Niro movie.
I was thinking of that, yeah.
And yeah, the intern. And we're getting incredible insights because their perspective and because of the experiences they had. They said, well, let me put it this way. So age should not be an issue. Now, also, if you are running a business, don't discriminate when you look at somebody who comes in, not looking like a 20-year-old.
Interesting. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say coming from the high-tech world, right, two names, one, both you see very often, right? Vinod Khosla, who's probably in his late 60s at this point, right? He's been through so many waves from Sun Microsystems to Google to being one of the first investors in OpenAI before they even had a model out there, right? He saw the potential. To a person out of Boston that I've been following pretty closely in his latest project, Michael Stonebreaker, who is the founder of Postgres, right, which really revolutionized how we think about relational databases, open source RDBMSs. And he's actually starting his latest company at age 83 as a Turing Award winner, really trying to revolutionize how we think about operating systems and actually bringing database schema into a Linux operating system. So I just think that's really fascinating. Been following his project, and if you want to see his interview online, it's on YouTube about how he thinks about databases especially as we bring more generative AI applications into this world. So just seeing his energy, his growth mindset, really I think goes back to Lucy's point, which is age is but a number. You just keep on learning.
We're coming to the close here, and I want to thank you guys. You're excellent leaders, each and every one of you, and it's been very insightful. And I think what you've shared is really great. Maybe there's a way to end this for our students at CU by just kind of going down the line. Nancy, we'll start with you. But what if you were talking to a graduating senior coming out this year who wants to be a great business leader? What's a sentence or two to say, hey, as you begin your career and you're thinking about your own leadership style, consider this?
Yeah, I'll use a phrase that Jeff has, which is there's no compression algorithm for experience. Right? So don't index on the job that's going to pay you the most. Index for the biggest learning. And that's what I've done consistently through my career, is sometimes I have run into, turnaround situations in teams or companies where things are not great, right? And it is a challenge because either you turn it around or you take a, stain on your reputation. But it's actually through those experiences that I personally have learned the most, not just about myself, but also what leadership style works for what organization.
I'll tell that person that the best place to score A's is out of the classroom. And they should be people who are focused on building the skills, but at the same time, they should also learn how to build relationships. And I've also tell them to go and read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Here's a classic for it.
Yeah.
Lucy?
Self-edification, continuously. And now that we have the tools in our hands, literally in the palm of our hands, you must always be learning. Just because you graduated and you have a diploma does not mean you are set. You have to continuously be learning and do that. Today we have how many generations in the workforce? 4, 5?
Mm-hmm. At least.
Self-edificate and have those people who you are learning from the various generations that are around you today.
I guess I would emphasize, on the laundry list of leadership qualities, I come from a newsroom environment, so accessibility is really key for us. I've been through so many managing editors who, I don't know if they ever set foot in the newsroom. Oh, wow. And they're long gone, and we still talk about it. So their presence, their time spent is a tool. They should use it. Also in the world of media, the Wall Street Journal has this reporter who's been detained in Russia named Evan Gersovich. And the Journal the other day did a page 1 where arguably his story might have been, and they left it blank. And I think there's a sense, I worked at the Journal for 6 years, knowing that your bosses will fight for you and your team, not just in back channels or policy discussions, but like overtly fight for you, means a lot. And I think workforces feel that.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for attending. Thank the panel. Appreciate it. And this closes our session.